Welcome back to the Contacts Coaching Podcast. We are joined today by Susanville, California legend, Coach Moore, joining us from Lassen High School in Susanville, California. Paul has been the head softball coach for a number of years. He just gave up being the head basketball coach. He has been a football coach, and we're going to hear this entire story, and it's right in alignment with what we like to talk about, which is cross-disciplinary training. So, Coach, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, it's a true honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, well, let's dig in. So always need to ground the audience and exactly who we're talking to. So if you could take us through your background and then your coaching background. How'd you get into this profession? What was the process like for landing your first job? How did you pursue and or fall into other opportunities? And, just take us through the history.
Sure. So immediately after graduating from high school, one of my coaches, Bill Elena, who was the head football coach at the time, he brought me on as an assistant. So I was an assistant varsity football coach the first year I was out of high school. He was also the freshman boys basketball coach, so I was his assistant there as well. So I had planned on learning from him for years to come. I really had. But unfortunately, his parents were killed by a drunk driver, and he had to take over the motel business where I currently work. I've worked for him for the last 25 years. He's still one of my great mentors. He was an amazing coach. His uncle Jack actually played on UCLA's only national championship football team, and in that same year was third in the heavyweight wrestling division for NCAA Division I. So that's the type of family I got involved with. He's mentored me all along the way. But when he got out, most of his coaching staff got out. I think there was only two of us from his staff that stayed on. So the very next year, I was the head JV football coach. Oh, if you want to talk about a nightmare, it was an absolute nightmare because I was terrible. I look back at the things that we did, and it was so bad. It was unbelievable. But I learned a lot during that process too, because I was kind of thrown in the fire. I didn't know, being an assistant that had no responsibility, then all of a sudden at 1920, I was the head JV football coach and then was still assistant basketball coach. So I did that for a couple years. My third year there, I actually became a 3-sport coach for the first time. And I've done that for much of my career. I've always coached at least 2 up until maybe next year, I guess. But a lot of times had done 3. One of the other football coaches was the head softball coach and actually talked me into being his assistant. So I did that for the 1 year. And then I had to go away to school because there's only a JC in Susanville. Luckily, during that last year, I met Brian Katz. And as his wife says, him and I must have hit it off right away because I've been friends with him for over 30 years. I think his wife and I, and maybe Tim, are the only people that have put up with him for 30 years because, we all know he's a little bit quirky. So, you have to take the good with the bad, but he is a great person. I've probably stayed at his house over 100 times, in the last, 30 years. So I used to go to all the games at Delta, went to at least 3 or 4 games a year at Sac State. So, when we get on the phone, it's hard to get off. So, but getting to know him, he knew I was going to go to University of Nevada the next year, and he hooked me up with Dick Lee, who's kind of a Reno legend now because, he's won state championships at 2 different schools, I believe. He's retired now, but he was an assistant at Alaska Fairbanks, but took over the job at Sparks High School. Hey, when we got to Sparks, I'm telling you, it was a disaster. There were the equipment, the old coach had gotten rid of it. We don't even know where it went, but Dick jumped in with both feet. He was actually living in a bus that he turned into RV on campus when he first got there. So Brian hooked me up with him. I don't know how we even met because he didn't have a phone at that time because he was living in that, in that bus. But meeting him was great because then I got hooked up at Sparks High School And so the entire time I was at University of Nevada, and then even 1 year following, I ended up coaching 3 sports at Sparks High School, including becoming the head softball coach at like the age of 25.
Hmm.
And how that is, a young man coaching a female sport at the age of 25. I mean, it was interesting to say the least.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Okay, okay. And then from there, actually another Sacramento person, I'm not sure if you know him or not, I might mention him a few times too, Michael Bastian, took the head softball coach at Centenary College in Louisiana, which at the time was the smallest Division I school in the nation. They're not Division I anymore. They've moved down to Division III. Robert Parrish went to school there. And then while I was there, Herbert Lang, who is better known as Flight Time from The Amazing Race. I think he was on it 3 times. He played for the Globetrotters. He played basketball there while I was there, and we actually developed a friendship, and I still talk to him today. So that was kind of a cool thing, but Louisiana was not for me. The people were great, but the humidity, I know that you know what it's all about and all that. That was not for me. So I came back to Susanville, went to work at the motel. Right away, the new head football coach, who was another unbelievable mentor to me, Tom St. Jacques. He played at Cal State Fullerton, was a quarterback for Mariucci, and he was the head football coach, had been there a couple of years, but he hadn't really had a staff that he was able to put together. So right away, I was with him in football. Then the guy that started me at softball, Dennis Gentini, wanted to get out. So right away, I was an assistant football coach, the offensive coordinator the very first year I was back there, and I was the head softball coach. So I was right away when I came back, I was thrown into the fire. And then, later on, I became the girls basketball coach and the boys basketball coach, and I've done softball ever since I've been back for the most part. And until Coach St. Jacques retired a couple of years ago, I was his offensive coordinator the entire time. And he was the real deal. I mean, people around this area know about it. We won several section championships. Actually, they didn't have state playoffs then, but we had a 2-year run where we won 24 straight games, never lost in 2 years. And I just learned so much from him. And we'll get into some of the stuff that we did that I think is very valuable, that people can use it wherever they're at now.
Thank you. I appreciate that background. And my general question, right, is usually along the lines of you're moving over into the head coach's role, but you've done it a few times. And I ask, what'd you realize right away you needed to figure out? And you mentioned that as the head JV football coach at whatever 20 years old, and how terrible that was because you didn't know what the hell you were doing. When you became the head softball coach again later on, similarly, and then when you slid into those basketball jobs. But what are the themes? What are some stories and maybe anecdotes you can give that are short, but that will highlight the themes of, hey, you can have been prepared under the best mentors, but when you slide over a little bit, it's going to blow your hair back?
I would say the biggest thing is as an assistant coach, you never realize all the little things that come into play. You don't realize about booster clubs, okay, and the role that they play and that they're important, but you can't let them be too important, okay? That was one of the biggest things. The next thing is that, you can't do everything yourself. Early on, I tried to do everything. Like, I'm doing the field, I'm setting up the gym, whatever needs to be done, it's all going to be on me. You have to have people you rely on. Okay. And I always, when I hired assistants, it had to be in a certain area, of course, but I always wanted to have somebody at least in 1 or 2 areas that was smarter than I was. Okay. Because you always need people that are smarter than you, because you need people to challenge you all the time. And I was lucky enough, that I had mentors that challenged me, but I also had some great assistant coaches that challenged me along the way as well.
When you talked about the JV football deal being a disaster, what are the things that jumped out at you that you can share with other people that may be finding themselves in that situation?
Well, the biggest thing is I had no idea back then what true preparation was all about. Um, you just kind of think that, you might watch just a little bit of film, if at all, back then, and you would come up with a game plan, but it's not a well thought out game plan because you got to really dive in. Okay. You got to really dive in. I really believe in all sports. You have to dive in. I think that, people don't realize how easy things are today. It used to be you had to go get the VHS tape from somebody, you had to bring it back, and then you had to break it down. And you had to, I, I just think that you need to know your personnel before you do it too. And that was something that I didn't do a very good job of as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And when you mentioned that becoming a softball coach as a male at the age of 25, right, that presents its own set of challenges. Can you take a couple of moments to speak to what those were and how you navigated them, and maybe in hindsight, what you would do differently?
Mhm. Well, luckily, when I took over at Sparks, we had an unbelievable team. I was the assistant for 1 year, and we won the zone championship, and which is like the North championship. And then with semifinals of state, had a really good team, and we had a lot of players back that were going to sign in college. One, several Division I players, and so we had a really good team. But what I didn't realize back then is that you have to make sure that they know that you're in charge. I almost probably was too much of a friend to them at times, and that makes it really tough to, when things come down the line, you're going to have those hard conversations with them. And I didn't realize that at that point because I knew how good of players they were. So I was afraid to, get on them too hard because I was afraid of losing them. So, which I realized later, that's a huge mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. And how would you say you strike that balance when you're trying to set boundaries, right? Use the word make sure they know who's in charge. But I think ultimately what you're trying to do is delineate roles and responsibilities and accountability. How do you walk the line of coming off as a total ass trying to be on some sort of power trip versus, no, look, the buck stops here and we're going to have some direct and clear boundaries in what we're doing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first off, that you have to make sure that they understand that you care about them as people first. Okay. Because if they know that you care about them as people first, and I always, even today, I try, no matter what sport I'm doing, I check in at least once a week, hey, and talk about something that has nothing to do with them as an athlete. I want to know how they're doing as a person. Okay, because if you can do that, trust me, they'll play much harder for you, no matter what the sport is. That number one. But number two, I think that you have to explain. Okay, kids today, especially, you can't just tell them to, hey, go shoot that fall away jump shot from the corner and fall into the bleachers. You have to explain why things work. Okay, why things are better. Okay, and why our process is something that will benefit you. You can't just tell them to do things anymore. The why is very, very important.
No doubt. So after all these years and culture that you've been able to establish, especially on the softball front, but also as being the offensive coordinator in football forever and then being the head coach of both genders of the basketball team, what would you say is the best thing you do in your program that were you to leave and go coach somewhere else would come with you, regardless of the discipline that it was, right? We do this, and here's why, and this is the transformational effect that it's had for us.
Well, I think it starts with embrace where you're at. And what I mean by that is here's what I use that we used in football as well, is we literally say it. We are Lassen. Okay. We are Lassen. And what that represents is this. Number one, everywhere is going to be different, but every school has something that you can fall back on. So at Lassen, our closest league game is 2 hours on the bus. Closest. We're in the mountains, all the other schools in the valley. So what we always say is, hey, we're mountain men. We're tougher than you are. Okay. We know what it's like to travel. When you come here, you ain't coming here to win ever. Okay. And I think the best compliment we ever got on that came from Pleasant Valley High School in Chico, Sterling Jackson. I mean, they had Aaron Rodgers at one time. It wasn't that year, but he told us, hey, we know when we come to Lassen, it's where good teams go to die. Because we always had our kids convinced that, we were a little bit different. So everything we do, we're the Grizzlies and all that, but we don't put a paw on our helmet or on our jerseys or whatever. Everything we have, it says we are Lassen, because we want our kids to take pride in that we're different than everybody else, and you just have to install that pride about wherever you're at and get the kids to buy into that pride. And then, you're tough to beat. You're tough to beat when you have that aura about you.
Yes, and I think the key there is to embrace where you're at. And for those of you that are listening that have no idea where Lassen is, go ahead and Google Susanville, California, and you will understand what Coach is talking about when he says the nearest game is 2 hours away by bus. Circling back to that, because as you said, that is a home advantage no matter what sport you're playing when they have to come to you in the mountains. What would you say, having coached all of these sports and continuing to coach all of these sports? I'm always curious what people learn watching other teams. But in your case, I really want to know, over the 30 years you've done this, or whatever the number is, but like, what has transferred directly from one discipline to another that you have intentionally taken, having had an aha moment, right? Where it's like you're out at football in the fall as the offensive coordinator and something clicks and you're like, wow, we're going to do this in softball because this is the missing link. Can you talk about a few of those things over the years that have transferred between the sports that you've coached, and how being willing to look there for growth has been transformational in the success you all have had?
Yeah. Well, I always say this. I think either you can coach or you can't coach. That if you can coach, there's going to be different skills and there's going to be different, philosophies depending on the sport. But if you can coach, you can coach. So my wife hates it. I'll just let you know right now. I can't watch a game and enjoy it because I'm always trying to find something. I literally can't. I watch and I'm always trying to watch what other people do in every sport, because I really do think that everything translates. I really do think that, that the way that people care about their athletes and their athletes care about them goes across all sports. Okay. And I really think the fact that, no matter what sport it is, I think which teams are prepared. You always know which teams are prepared. I mean, it doesn't matter what sport it is. The most prepared team, they're going to be successful most of the time. Okay. Unless the difference in talent is just so big. So I always look and see what everybody else is doing in every sport and see how I can be more prepared by what they do with their team.
Yeah, no doubt. I think you're going to find universal agreement on that point. And I'm still curious, right? As you transition from season to season and you evolve as a coach, are there some specific tactical things that you've been able to adopt, some specific training methodologies that you've been able to transfer? What does that preparedness look like, right? And I ask simply because you are in a very unique place where you don't have 100 basketball coaches within driving distance to go watch basketball if that's your pleasure, right? You do on the internet, whatever these days, but cutting your teeth, you didn't. So you had to source growth in other places. So I want our generation, right, to share with the new generation that like you can find help anywhere, even if you're semi-isolated like you are in Susanville. So if you can potentially name a few things that you've been able to evolve over the years, I think it would be very well received by the audience.
Yeah. Well, I think cross training is huge. Okay. and I know Coach Katz and I 100% agree on this. I want them to play a lot of sports because things do transfer. Let's just take hitting, for example. Hitting and swinging a tennis racket have so many components that are almost the same, especially when you talk about the lower body, okay, and transferring weight, okay, throwing a ball, okay, whether it's throwing a football, throwing a baseball, throwing a softball, the mechanics are all pretty similar, okay, and I think that the people that play the most sports, okay, develop all of the different techniques and all the different muscles, and I I don't like this era where people are only playing one sport. I really don't. I just think that they're becoming way too specialized. Okay. And I think they're maxing out way too early. Okay. I want my athletes to play more than one sport. The football coaches, his joke was, hey, everybody should play at least two sports. Football should just be one of them, but I kind of agree in a part, but I want my basketball players to play other sports as well, because I don't want them to just be so consumed that they get burnt out come February as well, too, because I've seen that happen as well. I think it's very important, and I really don't like the direction that we're going with this, where people are only playing one sport. I really wish we could go back to people doing 2 and 3.
I agree with you. That is my soapbox on this. If you've listened to these, how do you combat the youth sports industrial complex that has poisoned the well with this idea of sports specialization? How do you battle that? And I know, like me, at a small school, we need all of our athletes, and so we have a little bit more of a hook. And you, where you are, you probably do as well. But when you have those kids coming in and it's like, coach, I'm just going to do this because I'm going to go get a scholarship. What's your messaging, and how do you help them understand that, hey, look, the research doesn't support it. Truthfully, the numbers don't support it in regards to who actually matriculates to college. You really need to keep doing multiple things.
One, you just said it. Let's look back at the last few NFL drafts. Okay. So you have to point those things out to them. Number one, hey, look, this guy did 3 sports. Look at the millions of dollars that he's making. Okay. That number one. And number two, this whole notion that you need to start playing travel ball at age 10, that you need to be on this softball elite team at age 12 because that's the only way that you're going to be recruited. Hey, I'm not bragging here. I'm just telling you, we've had more kids sign in softball at Lassen High at 4-year schools. Hey, if they want you, they're going to find you. Okay. Because if they're going to find a kid from Susanville, they're going to find a kid from Sacramento. They're going to find a kid from Reno. And, this whole notion about the full ride scholarship, come on, let's be honest. Let's look at it. Let's look at Division I sports. What do they get? 11.7. So not everybody on their roster is going to get a full ride scholarship. And think about, if you start when you're at age 12, how much money are you spending? Where if you just put that in a savings account, hey, it would more than pay for the scholarship, all the money that these people are paying to play on these so-called elite teams.
Yes, sir. Love it. And I appreciate not just the anecdotal, but the data as well. 11.7 scholarships in softball on a 20 player roster, right? Yeah. Do the math. And I think that's something that people don't often want to consider. And to your point, right, if you just took that money and put it into 529, right, you're not necessarily going to need the financial assistance in the same way in which you think you do. Let me ask this. Going all the way back to your 19-year-old self, a year removed, or the year after you graduated, getting into this business to now, how would you say your approach to coaching has evolved? How has it changed?
Yeah, well, 2 things. One is I always say this: if I'm not getting graduation and wedding announcements, I'm doing something wrong. Okay. Where early on, we all want to win. I don't think anybody in this business does it that doesn't want to win. But for me, I've really, the last 20 years, I'll say, been more focused on developing people rather than developing winning. And, the lifelong, it's crazy. It's crazy the lifelong relationships that you develop, that you get the wedding invitation, that you get the picture of the new baby, that that you have them call you in the middle of the night because of something that's going on in your life. Those things to me are way more important than winning. Where early on, winning was pretty high up there, and through the years and the different sports, we've done our share, and I joked with someone the other day, through all of it, I think it's 9 or 10. I don't even know now. I have 9 or 10 section championship rings. You know where they are? They're in some drawer somewhere. They don't mean anything really. I never pull them out. My kid wanted to see him a year ago. He's 9. He wanted to see him. But other than that, they never come out. But hey, those relationships that I've developed in the last 20 years, they come out all the time.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. The length of your tenure across all sports has probably left you with some valuable teaching moments for yourself, right? Where we failed at something. Do you have a few of those that you lean on where, hey, this was a pivotal moment for me because of the way I did not show up in the best way, or I failed at X, was a pivot point that then I was able to use that throughout the rest of my career to be better at what I do. I'm always curious what people's stories of failures are that have helped them grow into who they are today.
Well, early on, or even, probably, 15 years ago, I would let a loss or a bad performance, I would dwell on it for entirely too long. Okay. My favorite saying now is, what's the most important play? It's the next play. What's the most important game? It's the next game. Because the one that's over, you're never going to get back. Of course, you want to learn from it. Okay. But you have to let it go and you have to move on. And I think that is so critical in all athletics, that, hey, this play's over. What's the next play? Because it's the most important play at this point. So you need to really, really focus on what's coming and not dwell on what happened in the past, because you're never going to get it back.
Yeah, and that's a learned skill. What would you say is the moment that allowed you to transition from hanging on every one of those losses to, you know what, that's in the past. Let's keep it moving.
I don't know if we ever truly do, but it's on topic, but off topic a little bit. I've had a tough year. Okay. And I think that has been something that has helped me with the March 13th of 2022. Okay. At church. Okay. Everybody, it's really hit home with me in the last, whatever it's been, 6 months now. So the Damar Hamlin situation was me exactly at church. So had a cardiac arrest at church, lucked out like no tomorrow. Even the nurses, after I was care flight to Reno, said, hey, you're a miracle. Because I had people there that and made sure we had an AED machine, okay, and performed CPR on me. And, I have a defibrillator in me now. But what it did for me is it has changed me in that I am so appreciative of the things that I've gotten to do, the people that I've gotten to meet through athletics. And, I'll just tell you, last year's team was the most amazing team. We didn't win any championships, but it'll be a team that I'll never forget. I only ended up missing 2 games last softball season, but this in 2022. But the things that they did for me that I never thought anybody would do, they were there for me every moment of the way for months. Even when the summer hit, they were still there for me. So the biggest thing is it just made me appreciate so much of how lucky I am, for 34 years of coaching. I demanded when this happened that it not go on social media. Okay. And other than at a church service, I don't really talk about it very much, but I feel compelled now just because of the amount of people that I know that I've had impact on that have reached out during the last year that you don't realize. And, all of us coaches, I think that we need to just make sure that we take a moment, as Coach Katz would say, don't blink, stay in the moment, and make sure that you truly appreciate what you have. In this last year, I went back and watched some of our teams play because I don't remember things that have happened. Like, we did that. I don't remember that in the moment. But now that this is all taking place, it's made me 1,000 times more appreciative. And it's made me appreciate the people that I have in my life, especially, in the coaching realm. It's made me appreciate them so much more.
Yeah, that actually captures a lot of my question format in regards to ways in which you've changed, things that you've overcome. And, there's not a whole lot that's going to top that segue that you just created on your own. But I do want to talk a little bit about the network of coaches and support that you've been able to develop over the years and the role that has played. And more specifically, how would you invite younger, that's not fair, I don't want to put an age on it, but people that are new to the profession, to help them figure out how to network and to meet people and find those mentors, especially when they might be isolated like you?
Number one, most importantly, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask. I mean, at the time I had met Coach Katz and known him for a couple months, but had the opportunity to be around his team and was at Santa Clara, and Dick Davey and Carol Williams, legendary Santa Clara coaches. I was scared to death to ask them questions, but he goes, "Hey, go ask. They won't mind at all." I'm like, "Are you kidding me? They're legends." So from that point on, just because of the way that they treated me, and then, I'll just tell you, people will do it because there's no secrets. Everybody thinks there's secrets. There are no secrets. Everything's been done at some point. There's been so many people that have been in this business for so long that, hey, if you think you're coming up with something new, you're probably not. 99% chance you're not. And so my number one thing was, hey, don't be afraid. Make sure that you ask. And then kind of a dying thing that was big for me is go to clinics. Clinics are so good. I'm so glad that in Sacramento the last 2 years, they've been having the one out at William Jessup. And not only has it been great speakers, but just getting to sit there and talk to other coaches, because you're not going to talk to the coach that you're playing that day because it's all about that day. But in a setting like that, you can sit and talk and you can learn so much by just listening. So when you have the opportunity, if they ask you a question, 100% always answer it. But take the opportunity to listen to what they're talking about. Go to clinics, reach out to people. Hey, and just don't be afraid to ask. Please ask. I'll never say no to anybody. Not that I have all the answers, because I don't, but young coaches need to ask and take advantage of their opportunities.
No doubt. And I actually will push back a little bit. At this point in my life, I go sit down next to the other coach half the time before our games and we chop it up and talk about stuff that's basketball related or not. Because, like, to your point, at this point, like, I don't care. It's like the hay's in the barn. Like, whatever happens is going to happen. I'm probably not going to see you again for another 4 weeks and then a year. So I might as well talk to you right now about what's going on. And I think that's the biggest thing, where when we're younger, the relationship is almost adversarial, and it doesn't need to be, right? We're all trying to do the same thing, which is help our student athletes become better people. And, the athletic discipline is a vehicle to do that. And so to your point, build relationship, go talk to people. Nothing bad comes from it. It's only positives. Let me see here. My usual closing question you've already addressed. So I'm going to do this just so we can humor Coach Katz. What's the best thing that you've learned from him that you have not only used yourself, but offered to other people as advice and or a way to handle things?
I would say it's impossible to be over prepared. If you know Coach Katz, one video is not enough. 100 videos is not enough. Watching it one time is not enough. Watching it 100 times is not enough. Not only of your opponents, but of your own players as well. I just think that he does such a great job of knowing everything there is to know about his own team and knowing everything there is to know about the other team. And I've tried to implement that. Luckily, this is kind of on the subject, but kind of not. One of the greatest days of my life was on a golf course with him and Coach St. Jacques and myself. And the three of us just talking about it. And the two of them are so similar. They had heard about each other and both been to my wedding, things like that. But it was the first time we really got to hang out. And they both said the same thing. Hey, we got to be the most prepared because I'm not the smartest. And I think that's Coach Katz in a nutshell. I think that's Coach St. Jacques in a nutshell.
Love that. And I thought we were going to be done, but I remembered the other question I wanted to ask you. Building staffs and finding people to help coach is challenging already. I would assume it's challenging on steroids where you are located. So can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to do that over the years and find ways to not only find coaching help, but to build staffs that can support these student athletes when you are miles from anywhere and it's not necessarily teaming with resources, both human and otherwise, in order to address that situation?
Well, I think the biggest thing is as long as they believe in your core values, you can teach them everything else. Okay. As long as they're not going to, I firmly believe this too. I would, and I would never work for someone that I would say something bad about in public. And I always tell them when I'm putting them on my staff, hey, you know what? We can disagree. Throw every idea you have at me. I might take it, I might not, but throw every one of them out there. I go, trust me, because they know Coach St. Jacques, he's the true legend in town. And they know that we disagreed 5 million times, but we're best friends, and I never one time ever said anything bad about him in public. And they know that. And I never would. And that's all I want, them to have the same core values and to never, if they want to tell me in a room that I'm a horrible coach, okay, we can discuss the reasons why. But in public, hey, you got to be supportive. And I think those two major things are the key.
Yeah. And I think what you said, if they're aligned with you, you can teach them how to coach. And I think that's the biggest deal, right? Who in community is going to be enthusiastic, that has time, that wants to be around kids, and you can teach them what they need to know. And I love that approach because even at this point, I still get, paint myself into a corner at times. Well, it's, they don't have any experience doing X. And it's like, you know what? That's just the shortcut. If you really want to create opportunities, then you need to pour in and teach them to fish, so to speak. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Coach. I really do. Thanks for reaching out and looking forward to getting this out over the airwaves.
Thank you so much for having me.